Tonight's bedtime story is called Mr. Men in Space. Mr. Men Adventure in Space, read by the same artists. Mr. Wrong had just got a job as a tour guide at the Space Center. He was very proud of his new job, so he invited all his friends to the Space Center to show them around. Mr. Wrong showed his friends the first spacecraft that had landed on the moon. "This is the first kettle to land on the moon," explained Mr. Wrong. "That's not a kettle," said Mr. Wise. He showed them around the huge hall where the Saturn V rocket was kept, and he showed them how to put a spacesuit on. "I don't think that's quite right," said Miss Wise. Then Mr. Wrong took them outside where there were two rockets standing by side. "We can have a look inside rocket 2, said Mr. Wrong, and they all travelled up into a lift to the hatch at the top of the rocket. "Rocket 1 is going to be launched on a mission to Mars today," explained Mr. Wrong, pointing to the other rocket. They climbed through the hatch and were all standing admiring the space capsule, when suddenly there was a rumble that built into a roar that made the rocket vibrate and shake. The noise was extraordinary. It was like 1,000 elephants all trumpeting and stamping at the same time. Rocket 2 had lifted off. They were on the wrong rocket. They were going into space. Mr. Wrong looked at all his friends, and all his friends stared at Mr. Wrong. "Oops," he said sheepishly. The rocket soared into the sky, leaving a great trail of smoke. Mr. Wrong and his friends stood in a huddle, wondering what was going to happen next. Then a hatch door opened. It was an astronaut who looked just as surprised as the rest of them. "Who are you?" he exclaimed. We got on the wrong rocket," explained Miss Wise. "Who are you?" "I am Captain Strongarm, and we are on a mission to Mars." "Mars?" gulped Mr. Rory. "Could you just take me home first?" "I'm sorry, we can't return till we have completed our mission," said Captain Strongarm. "Oops," said a small voice in the corner for the second time that day. "Can you show us where we are going?" asked Miss Wise. "Sure, this is our solar system, and there are 8 planets. This is Earth, and this is Mars," the captain said, pointing to a large screen. "This is the sun. We don't want to get too close to that because the sun is so hot. We would sizzle like a sausage." "Sausages? Murmured Mr. Greedy. "Yummy." There were lots of strange things in space. For one, there was no gravity, and they all found themselves floating around the cabin. Mr. Topsy-Turvy did not know whether he was the right way up or the wrong way down. But then Mr. Topsy-Turvy is very used to that feeling. They found a black hole, and Captain Strongarm explained to them that there was nothing in a black hole. Even so, Mr. Nosy, being the nosy fellow he was, had to go outside and have a look. On the way to Mars, they had carried out some repairs, which meant leaving the rocket to go for a spacewalk. Mr. Lazy discovered that this was just the kind of walk that he liked. Not so much walking, but more floating on his back. Finally, after months flying through space, they arrived on Mars. To everyone's surprise, they were not the first ones there. Is that a Martian?" asked Mr. Rory nervously when they saw a tent. Nobody had an answer, not even Miss Wise. But it wasn't a Martian. It was Mr. Impossible on a camping trip. "I always come here for the summer," said Mr. Impossible. "I like to get away from it all." "That's impossible," said Captain Strongarm, shaking his head in disbelief. They unloaded the moon buggy, although Miss Wise did point out that it ought to be called the Mars buggy. They had landed on a vast, flat pane of red dust. There was nothing to see for miles around, except for one rock that Mr. Clumsy managed to drive into. Whoops. Suddenly an alarm sounded. "What's that?" asked Mr. Worry, leaping into the air, or at least he tried to leap into the air, but found him who was already there. The alarm had rung because there was a meteor shower heading their way. "Don't worry," cried Mr. Strong, who leapt into action. He bounced around the surface, catching the meteors and throwing them back into space. After a few days on Mars, it was time to go home. Oops. Captain Strongarm started the rockets and they began to rise in the air. "Goodness gracious," exclaimed Miss Wise, "we left Mr. Small behind." "I can't stop the rocket now," cried Captain Strongarm. Poor Mr. Small. He was so small nobody had noticed that he was still on the surface. He was going to be left behind on Mars. There was nothing they could do. Or so they thought, until Mr. Bounce jumped out of the rocket's hatch, grabbed Mr. Small by the scruff of his spacesuit, and bounced right back up the safety of the rocket. "That's what I call a bouncy ride," cried Captain Strongarm. Captain Strongarm was very pleased with the mission. It had been a great success, and they had collected lots of samples to take back to Earth. Mr. Strong looked at all the samples. "It seemed a very long way to just come and to collect some rocks," he said. "There are lots of rocks back on Earth." On the way home, they stopped at the International Space Station for tea. "Where are the trains?" asked Mr. Strong. "It's not that sort of station," sighed Miss Wise. Mr. Strong also couldn't understand why the tea was not in the cup and saucer. So Miss Wise showed him why. While everyone was having tea, Miss Naughty sneaked out and went for a ride on a satellite, all the way round Earth. It only took 90 minutes for her to orbit the Earth, and she was back in time to catch the space shuttle home. The space shuttle plunged back through Earth's atmosphere with the same force that everyone had experienced when they had taken off. They splashed down safely in the sea. "Well," said Miss Wise to Miss Strong, "I think I can safely say that was the very best tour any tour guide has ever taken me on. A very, very, very long way away. 140 million miles to be as precise as Miss Wise." Mr. Impossible settled down in his deck chair to enjoy some peace and quiet when a small voice said, "Hello." It was a Martian. "That's impossible, I hear you say." "But is it?" Time for our top 10.